Biz First in Focus. This evening my guest is a very interesting character. He is hailing from Sri Lanka, a Sri Lankan born individual, now serving as a state MP in the lower house of parliament in Australia. He is none other than Mr. Jude Pereira. He is the state member for Cranbourne district in Victoria State. A very good evening and welcome to Biz First in Focus, Mr. Pereira.
Thank you very much, Shamir. Thanks for the opportunity to come and have a conversation with you.
It's a pleasure to have you on board, Mr. Pereira. Starting off, tell us a little bit about what you do as a state MP in the lower house of the Australian Parliament.
The first thing is participating in legislation, debates, and passing, of course, bills of parliament which becomes acts, which as do all the other members of parliament across the world. And work in parliamentary committees. We have a set of committees, permanent committees, and representing the constituents in my electorate.
Mr. Pereira, you are among a very few Sri Lankans to hold high positions in the Australian government. You are the first Sri Lankan to be elected to the lower house of parliament. What is the secret to your success? Not all Sri Lankans can do this feat. What was your secret recipe or the ingredient that you put in to be the MP of a lower house in the Australian Parliament?
Well, that's a very good question, and a lot of people ask me that. Well, I don't know, I can only guess. I have a political background in Sri Lanka before leaving to Australia, and I have to admit that my father was a member of the Lanka Samsamaja Party, and I had a lot of Lanka Samsamaja Party influence. In good old days, people call Samsamaja Party is the political university. So if you had that influence, you know how the political structures are placed, how maneuvering takes place, how you can work through within your party, then that is the number one important thing in getting pre-selected to stand for a election. Most find the difficult part for them is to get pre-selected from a major party. Once you get pre-selected from a major party, if there's a swing towards that particular party in an election, winning an election is not the most difficult thing.
Winning an election is not the most difficult thing, but in Sri Lanka, if you take a look at the elections, Mr. Pereira, a lot of money needs to be spent in order to obtain a seat, maybe in the provincial council, maybe in the local government, or the money goes exorbitantly very high when it comes to parliament. In your case, how was this feat possible? You said it's not difficult, but it is difficult at the same time. How did you do it?
That's correct. Difficulty is getting the pre-selections from the party. Once you get your pre-selections, the whole team is behind you. Unlike here, the fundraising is accepted. You don't have to have your own money to spend in the election. In fact, there's a restriction from the Victorian Electoral Commission that you cannot spend your own money more than a certain amount. So it has to be raised from the community. So that is where the community participation is, and party also helps. So a lot of fundraising takes place in the lead up to an election, and funds can be raised. People don't look up to you as a person with wealth to vote for you, because you can't forget that Australia is an egalitarian society.
What changes have you been able to instill in the lower house of parliament?
What changes have
you been able to instill?
Basically, being a member of parliament, backbencher, is one of the reasons one of the things you deliver in your electorate is mainly come as part of your role as a lobbyist. So you have the executive arm of the government, which are the cabinet and the premier, and then you have the backbenchers. Backbenchers lobby the cabinet to get things delivered. Now in my electorate there are a lot has been happening, like duplicating miles and miles of roads, hospital funding, what else, public transport. So those things are being working with the ministers and working with the community you deliver as a backbencher.
You are the first and only Sri Lankan to be appointed to the lower house of Parliament in Australia, Mr. Pereira. How does it feel to be among that cream, that cherry on top of the cake? How does it feel?
Oh, well, it feels good to be the first member of Parliament in the lower house in any Australian Parliament. Let it not just the Victorian Parliament. I'm the first. So I'm also a pathfinder. So a lot of people look up to me and say, well, if he can do it, we can do it as well. Sometimes they might don't foresee the difficult, the gravity of it, but still they can say, okay, he has been to the Parliament, so Victorian Parliament or any Australian Parliament, a person from Sri Lankan ancestry or person from darker skins can get elected as well. So that most important thing in my being the first is being a pathfinder.
Do you think you are successful in achieving your dream?
Yes, I have. I wanted to be, my dream was to be a full-time politician at any level, not just a member of Parliament, not even a party apparatchik.
Ms. Pereira, have you ever felt like running behind a mirage? Youngsters nowadays, they think that following your dreams, pursuing your dreams is like running behind a mirage. It sometimes might not even be able to be fulfilled by these individuals in question. Did you in any point think that you are running behind a mirage and you had to change course?
No, definitely not. The reason was I was not aiming at becoming a member of Parliament. I was interested in politics because political reforms, the change for the good. So end of the day, even if I have not been pre-selected to stand and to go into the Parliament, it was okay for me, because that wasn't my primary objective when I started and when I joined the Australian Labor Party. And there was a very strong conservative government, very right-wing government. It got elected in 1992. So that at that stage I decided only way through, I can't just be a bystander. I was involved in politics over here, over in Sri Lanka, so I should join the Australian Labor Party, which the only party can form alternative government. And so I was working there. Very soon they talked me into standing for an unwinnable seat. So we were not going to win that anyway. So it wasn't okay. And after that I had to work my way through, getting pre-selection for a marginal seat. And once I stood first time for the unwinnable seat, then that was the time I just really got interested in standing. Until such time I was there to work for the Labour Party.
Drawing your experience from as an MP in the state of Victoria, what lessons can Sri Lanka learn from the current political structure in Australia? You said that individuals can only bring in a certain amount of their money to the forefront. They have to raise the money through communities. They have to be able to get the support from the parties in question. What lessons can the Sri Lankan political culture learn from the Australian culture that is already being adopted very successfully?
Basically, my understanding is the law and order, rule of law, to follow the rule of law, and it's the law is common to everybody. There are nobody is treated special. So that's basically it is, because there is law. This is what you can do, but you can't go through the loopholes. So, and law is practiced and policed very well in Australia. It's the system that has been there for years and years. And in the Sri Lanka and Australia inherited British Westminster parliamentary system. Apart from the changes in 1978 moving into a presidential system, the difference was the interference of the culture. The culture change, all the practices are there, but because of the different culture in Sri Lanka, which is favoritism and nepotism and the personal influence, the system has looks from the outside it is very different to Australian system, but it is the same parliamentary system.
Ms. Pereira, you said that you were somewhat a political animal. Your father was a member of the Sama Samaja Party.
Yeah.
You were involved in a lot of politics since childhood,
Yeah.
and then your ambition was at the end of the day to be a politician. Now you are a formidable member in the Australian Parliament, in the lower house. Good governance was something which was envisaged in this country on the 8th of January 2015. Do you think that this government is doing enough in terms of the commitments they made to the public?
I don't think so.
And what is the reason behind this?
Because it is difficult for them to move away the political culture that was they are been there for years and years, and where they were part of it, their upbringing, because they can't think outside. I'll give you an example. I saw in the Facebook, the President Sirisena was saying he stopped Mrs. Rajapaksa being arrested, right? Now he would have said that in good faith that I did a good thing, but actually for me he's interfering is the judicial process. Now he's an executive, so there's no separation of powers. If he is going to protect somebody, I have nothing against Mrs. Rajapaksa being arrested. What I'm saying is, this is he as the executive is interfering in the judicial system.
As an expat, as an individual who is now working and living in Australia, what changes do you want to see here in the island if you were to come back to this resplendent nation?
Yeah. First one on the agenda would be law and order, and changes in the taxation system. The government are there to facilitate for a better life for the people. Economy has to grow. If you have a bigger cake, you can have a bigger piece. So to facilitate to business to grow, the government should have a good taxation system. And law and order, of course, I mentioned taxation system and industrial relations. The good industrial relations so that working people had a good working environment.
Let's say the government fulfills all these aspirations that you have in mind right now, law and order, a proper taxation policy,
public transport policy,
environmental policy,
devolution of power.
Let's say all these things are adopted by the present regime and change was instilled.
Yeah.
Would you consider coming back to Sri Lanka, leaving your top job in the Australian Parliament, Mr. Pereira?
Not leaving, but if I retire, I could consider, like, if I have a contribution to make.
Let's talk about contribution.
Yeah.
What can you bring in to Sri Lanka in terms of policy, in terms of change? What can you bring in as an individual?
Yeah, a lot of things. Good governance, which is a democratic way of doing things. In many areas, like there are sort of individual policy positions. It's like you can't write broadly, say, okay, I can change the world in 24 hours. But like, say, for example, parliamentary budget office, right? Budget office independently cost the policies. Like here, the political parties go to the election promising everything under the sun, but they are not costed, and they are not even challenged. They are not costed. You can't deliver this. Right now, in Australia, national parliament, and even recently we passed in Victorian Parliament to establish budget offices. They are independent. They scrutinize the policies of all parties, and they say this policy can be delivered or this cannot be delivered, considering the budgetary position. And
what are your hobbies, Mr. Pereira?
I don't have a lot of hobbies, unfortunately.
Are you interested in Australian football? Is that something that interests you?
Yes, Australian football interests me very well, because I'm in the tipping competition. It's a religion in Australia. So everybody is participating in some way, form or the other in Australian rules football. Otherwise, if you don't follow or back a team, you are treated as un-Australian or especially un-Victorian.
Mr. Pereira, next year marks a very significant milestone as far as Australia-Sri Lanka diplomatic relations are concerned. Next year would be 70 years since diplomatic ties began between the Australia government as well as the Sri Lankan government. Australian football, is it going to be on the cards as far as your visit here in Sri Lanka is concerned? Will you be bringing back a sport to Sri Lanka and improve the living standards of the people? Think differently?
Australian rules football is not on the cards at the moment. That's why I am here to promote it, because I see enormous opportunities by introducing Australian rules football here. I don't believe Sri Lanka needs another football code, but Sri Lanka needs a lot of friends. Now, Australian rules football is the religion of Australians. They are so much involved in Australian rules football. In Victoria, the grand finals in the football tournament, every year annually grand final is played in Victoria round about first week of October on a Saturday. So Friday, eve of that the football match, Victoria has been declared as a holiday, the public holiday for a football match. It is that important. Aussie rules football is for Australians. And in the morning of the grand finals day, the one club hosts the breakfast, and Australian Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, if they are in the country, always present at the breakfast. So it's a bipartisan thing, no political speeches, all fun, and people are backing teams.
If I ask you, Australian rugby, do you like rugby or do you like Australian football? What would be your pick?
Well, I would by far support Australian rules football, because after watching Australian rules football, it's boring for me to watch rugby. It's so slow. Every time they stop the ball. Australian rules football is, by contrast, is very dynamic. Every time it's action, it's either pass or tackle or a kick. Is moving. The game is moving. It's you can say a mixture of lot of games, including rugby, tackles, soccer, from a kicking perspective, and even netball from passing, hand passes, and basketball bouncing on the ground.
Which team do you support?
I support the Essendon Football Club.
But they're right at the bottom of the ladder. There are teams like Sydney, there are teams like Hawthorn who are on the top. You don't want to change teams. I am a supporter of Sydney, and you'll always lose the games, Mr. Pereira. Why support someone at the bottom of the ladder when you can support someone on top of the ladder?
Yeah, we do in this round, in this year. That doesn't mean we are going to lose in the future as well. However, you don't change your allegiances just because you are at the bottom of the ladder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pereira, for joining us this evening. A few things to be taken back home. You don't change your allegiances just because you are bottom of the ladder. A tip for our politicians, a tip for our people to take back something home from Mr. Jude Pereira. Also, you cannot change the world in 24 hours. You have to have the will to change the world. And that's what's important, and you have to be genuine in your effort. Thank you very much, Mr. Jude Pereira, for joining us this evening. State member for the Cranbourne district of the Lower House of Parliament. He is the only and the first Sri Lankan to take a post in the lower house of the Australian Parliament.
Any Australian Parliament.
In any Australian Parliament. Thank you very much, Mr. Pereira, for joining us this evening on Newsfirst in Focus. Pleasure was all mine today.
Thanks for the opportunity.